What we're going to do now is we're going to change gears, so to speak, and hear from a distinguished panel. In the plenary session, we heard some discussion about the definition of vulnerable populations and excluded populations. And we heard that it was certainly a very broad definition, and depending on the country and the context, the vulnerable populations of most interest tend to move on the priorities list. But the panel today is going to focus on a few of those populations that are very relevant and important in the discussion this week. I'm going to allow the panelists to introduce themselves. You have their bio sketches in the application and for the conference. So I will let them begin. But first, I actually cannot sit and speak, and I cannot do a session without audience participation. So this is the audience participation for the benefit of the panel in terms of you have an advantage of you know who we are, but we don't know who you are in terms of this panel. So this is raising of hands. How many of you are government officials or policymakers? Raise your hands. Hi, hi. Okay, it's about 20%. How many of you represent NGOs, non-governmental organizations? Okay, a few, okay. How many of you represent donors, funders? Pretty thin. Clinicians, nurses, doctors, practitioners. Okay. Representatives from industry. Great to see you here. Thank you for being here. It's hard to get you here. And finally, which I think is most relevant to this panel, is how many of you consider yourself or a member of your family or would self-identify as a vulnerable population? Good. The point of that was, if we're going to talk about vulnerable populations, we need to have their representation and hear their voices in meetings such as this. So I'm glad that we do have representation, and we hope that we will hear from you. So, without any further ado, we will begin with Miriam Veer. Miriam, would you like to introduce yourself? And please go ahead.